Hi, it's Sam. In this video, we're going to make a Max for Live device that will automatically record and enable the currently selected track. We're going to start off by selecting the Max for Live tab, and I'm going to select a max audio effect so that this effect can be placed on either MIDI instrument tracks or on audio tracks. Then I'm just going to click on the edit button here on the device's toolbar, and this opens up our empty audio effect. So in creating this device, we're going to interact with Ableton Live's API using what's called the live.object model. So let's open that up. Try that again. Okay, and it's already open here, so let me show you how to find it though. If you just type in LOM, then go to documentation, this is within the reference, you'll find the live object model here. And this is showing you how you can get to different parts of Live's API to turn on or off or change a function of certain parts of Ableton without having to actually click on it or interact with it in some way. And so we're going to look for the selected track because we want to grab the ID of whatever the selected track is. So I'm going to do selected underscore track. Okay. And we found that here. We have to figure out where this lives in the API. And it's this, the song view. And to get there, we need to go to live underscore set view. That is the path to get to song view. And within song view, we can get the selected track. So we need to follow this path. So we're going to use live.path, which navigates to objects in the live application. And again, in this case, we're looking for the selected track. So this takes a message, which is path. It always starts with path. And this will take us to whatever path comes after this. So after this path, we want to say live underscore set and then view. So when it gets this message, in the middle outlet, it'll send out the ID of the live set view. And from here, we can then get our selected track. Now, for this, we want to send the ID to live.observer, which will monitor changes in live objects. So we're going to be changing the selected track. We're going to be selecting different tracks as we go. And when we select a different track, we want to make sure that the new selected track ID is set out. So Live Observer will see if the currently selected track has changed, and if it has, it'll send out the ID of the track we are now selecting. So out of the middle inlet, we're going to send the ID. The ID goes here. But then we also need to send Live Observer the property that we're trying to observe. So let's use trigger to put these in the order we want. So starting with the ID, and that's I made this a list type because the ID is going to be something like ID space, then some integer like ID4 or ID3, something like that. And then we're going to bang in the property. And the property, as we said before, is the selected underscore, track. Okay. So just to review so far, we're telling live.path that we're trying to get to the live set view so that we can then access this property, which is the selected track. And we're sending that to the live observer so that we can get the new track ID whenever we've selected a different track. So now we're going to get the ID for the selected track, which we can then use to arm that track. But from here, we need to check something else, which is if this track can even be armed, because return tracks and the main track can't be armed because they're just not something you can record onto. So you want to ignore those if we've selected one of those tracks. So let's look at the live object model again. And what we're looking for is can be armed. And this is just going to be a Boolean value. So it's going to be 0 if they can't be armed and 1 if they can be armed. And one of the issues here for live observer is we need to defer the message from live observer. If we try to use this ID immediately, we're going to get an error. So we actually need to defer it. And let me just clear the console for a second. We can actually try using it and see what happens later. But then you know in advance that we need to defer this message. So from here, we're going to use live.object, which lets you perform operations on live objects. And in this case, we have the ID of the selected track, but we need to check if that is something that can be armed or not. So before we have the property, but now we're going to be using get. We're just getting the status of this can be armed. So we're just checking that value by getting it. And again, we'll use our trigger bang list to first send in the ID of the track and then check if it can be armed or not. Okay. Now, what comes out of live.object is first going to be the name of the whatever you're looking at. In this case, it's going to be can be armed, and then it's going to have the integer 0 or 1. So we can actually use the root object to get rid of the can be armed, so that we just get the 1 or the 0, which is what we're interested in here. And I'm just going to use a select 1. And so that we have a way of storing the ID and retrieving it later after we've checked if it can be armed or not, I'm going to use a zlreg to store the ID using the cold inlet so it's not sent out immediately. And then we're only going to bang it out if it can be armed. If it can't be armed, we're just going to ignore it. We're not going to send out the ID and subsequently arm it, because we shouldn't arm it if it can't be armed. Now from here, we should at least be able to check if we're getting an ID or not. And you know what? First, let's get rid of the defer low so I can show you what you get as an error if you don't use defer low. Or if you defer it using some other object. So let me select a different track, select some tracks, then go back here, and nothing's happened. And that's because I didn't put in the load mess yet. So let me double click on that and make sure that goes through. Looks like it went through. Okay. And it looks like the ID also went through. So actually, the defer low might not be an issue for getting. It might only be an issue for setting something. So you know what? Let's just leave it missing for now. And let me just keep it here for later when we eventually will need to put it back. So it looks like for getting, it's not going to be an issue, but for setting, I think that's going to be where we run into a problem. So let's set that up now. And what we need to do here is use the live object again. But instead of getting, we're now going to be setting, because we want to set the status of arm. And I think that's just arm. Let me just see. Yes, property arm. So this is going to be 0 or 1. 1 is for arming, 0 is for disarming. So we're just going to be setting set arm 1 because we want to turn it on. And again, let's use our trigger bang list to make sure this is in order. And now we might see the issue with setting this without deferring it. So nothing's happening. Let's go back. And here we go. It says, changes cannot be triggered by notifications. You will need to defer your response. So let's pop in defer low now after the live observer. Let's see if that fixes it. And it looks like that fixed it now. It's working, except we're also arming everything that we select, which could be very annoying. We might not really want that. So how can we fix this? Well, instead of just arming everything, let's save the previously selected track's ID, and then when we select a new track, we can then clear the previous track. So we're just going to add a bang here. And what we're going to do first is make another ZL reg, and we're going to save the track in ZL reg, but only after we've sent out the previous track ID. And then we can just do the opposite here, where we will send the ID of the previously selected track to live object and tell it to, instead of arming it, to disarm it by, instead of set arm 1, set arm 0. So set arm 0. Now what's going to happen is we're going to receive the ID of the currently selected track. And first, we're going to disarm the previously selected track, which has been saved in ZL reg. Then we'll save the currently selected track after that. Again, in the cold inlet so that we're not sending it out immediately. We'll then save it to, or I'm sorry, send it to live object and then tell it to arm now what is the currently selected track. Let's give this a try. Great, so now when we select a track, it's deselecting the record enable. And then we click on return tracks or the main track, it's just ignoring those. And it looks like that should account for any issues that might come up. Now, if you want to pick up a copy of this that I have coded that also includes an on-off function and exclusively arming only MIDI or only audio tracks or all tracks, you can pick that up in the link in the description to see how I coded that, and then you can use that in your sessions as well. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or clarifications, other things you want me to cover, please let me know. Otherwise, until next time, class is dismissed.